Hey YouTube, Marko with Marko Custom Fab, coming to you with this 1956 Pontiac that you saw in my last video as an introduction video. This is, today we're going to change the fuel tank, and I'm going to talk about fuel tanks today in your vintage cars, why it's important to make sure they're either cleaned out or good. This car's been sitting for about 45 years. A lot of cars I bought that have been sitting for a while, in the exception of one, the fuel tanks were just, even if they were in a garage, they created some rust in the top, and then that rust would turn into a powder, which would then clog up the inlet filter, and we're going to talk about that today. This car seems to be starving itself fuel, and then you have to, I actually used the fuel in the oil bath trick to get it home. So the fuel tank is something up with it, and I can look underneath. The fuel tank is kind of rusty looking on the outside. There's a good chance it's like that on the inside. So it's always a good idea. This car, I'm lucky enough that it's not an American Pontiac, so it's the same as a 55 Chevy, this car. So the fuel tanks are readily available, they're cheap. This one costs me about $140 Canadian, plus the sending unit. And when we're doing the fuel tank too, I had to make sure I had all the hardware, so I got some screws and things, stainless. When we're doing this job, we want to look at the safety aspect, so we want to put a block under the front wheel, use safety stands. We're going to jack up the car. And working with any fuel tank, new, used, old, whatever, if you're working opening up or anything, you want to be in a well-ventilated area, so you don't want to do this in an enclosed space. We're outside, so that's pretty good, and it's always a good idea to have a fire extinguisher on hand, just in case. Okay, so before we jack up the car, let's get the block under the tire. Okay, now that we got this jacked up, we're going to go underneath here and check out what we got. Okay, so you can tell what I mean under here. It's underside of the car isn't all that bad, but the fuel tank, yeah, it's a little rusty. I got to clean up the threads on these bolts. I don't want to. I don't have new ones, so we have to undo the line up here and undo the straps. There's a drain plug in the bottom. We can drain that first, but we probably don't have to. Okay, as you can see, I took a wire wheel to them on the end of a die grinder with a little wire wheel, and I cleaned up the threads the best I can. Now I'm going to take some WD-40. I don't have the good penetrating fluid here, but just soak them. And then while that's soaking, I'm going to undo the front fuel line. Okay, so as you can see, I got the fuel line disconnected up here from the sending unit. Now I just have to undo this wire, and we can undo those straps. Okay, so as you can see, these are the two tanks here. This one just pulled it out of the car, and it's got some rust in the bottom on the inside. It's actually not that bad on the inside. I wanted to pull the sending unit out, but the screws, I have to use an impact to try to get them out. But we'll focus on getting the tank in. What I wanted to do is just point out this car, even though it's not like it has been, you know, driven, let's say, in a lot of salt and things like that. It's on a farm. They had muddy roads, you know, gravel roads and things like that. So the top of this tank and everything is just covered with mud and all this stuff. It's been up there for a long time. So things like the sending unit, everything's packed. The fuel gauge didn't work. So yeah, with the new sending unit, new tank, this tank, you probably could clean it out. It's not that bad. You could clean this tank out and put a new sending unit in it. But anyway, I'm guessing the sending unit, that brass sock, I'll show you what I'm talking about here. Sort of this is actually cloth. There's like a little filter on the end here. And this here just gets varnished up with fuel, and then it won't pull any more fuel. I had this on another car that I did, my Chrysler, and that socket had plugged right up, and all the rust was getting into the filters and plugging it up. I'd have to change a filter every time I drove the car. It was really that bad. And the tank on the outside looked shiny. The car was kept inside. It was well kept, no miles on it. It had 16,000 miles on that car, but the inside of the tank was just rust. This one actually rusty looking on the outside. It's not that bad though. The inside of this tank is really not as bad as I thought it would be, but we're going to put in a new fuel tank. You do this job, it's available. This car, I mean, if this was a tank for you know, a Buick or something where you can't buy a fuel tank for it, I'd be laughing, because the inside of this tank's pretty good shape. But in this case, the tank is readily available for this application, so we're just going to put a new one in, and it'll just save all our problems down the road. Like as long as I own it, I know where it's at, and it's not going to see this kind of mud again. So we'll just put this together. When I put this sending unit in, you got to note there's a little dot on the sending unit, and it lines up with a dot on the gasket. That dot on the gasket there have to line up because this bolt pattern isn't perfectly spaced. The screws they come in a pack of 4, and I need 5. I had to buy 2 packs here at the local hardware store. I went there first to make sure I get all the hardware. Obviously I can't get the hardware out of this tank. It's pretty bad, pretty rough. So I got stainless screws too, and I'm going to use a little bit of anti-seize on the screws just to make sure that they go in nice and smooth. So let's get that done. Okay, nice and solid. Also want to point out, when I bought this sending unit, it did not come with a nut, so I bought that at the hardware store. That turned out to be a 5mm thread on it, so metric thread. On a car this old, I'm not sure it would have been metric from factory, so any of the factory hardware off of this tank would not have worked. So I'm glad I took the precaution to get that. Okay, now this tank's ready to go in, and I lubed up where the O-ring goes. You want to lube the O-ring as well. I just use a little bit of grease. It's a petroleum-based grease. I know that in some cases you don't want to do that on O-ring, but being that this has got gas in here anyway, I don't think this will hurt it. You want that lubed up really nice so you don't tear the O-ring going in for the fuel filler. And that's it. This is ready to go back in. I'm just going to go underneath the car and clean up the floor pan where the tank rides. There's some mud and stuff on there, so that when the tank goes in, it's nice and clean. I'm just going to take this plastic bristle brush and clean up some of the dirt that's under there. Okay, so now I got it cleaned up. It might be a good idea if you were, if you had this car to a point. I don't, but if you were at a point you wanted to clean the floor really nice, paint it before you put the gas tank in, that'd be a nice thing to do. I tried to order new straps. They were out of stock, so when I get new ones in, I'm going to replace them. Or you could sandblast those and paint them nice. But right now I'm just going to hang the tank up so I can get the car workable, usable, movable. And then down the road, when I do more to this car, then we can pull it out and do some of that. So I would recommend, though, now that you have it out, would be a good time to completely clean it. You could either use a spray guard, or if you had body color or some sort of paint, you could even brush it on or something just to protect it, keep it from rusting. The floor is pretty nice underneath. I'll show you, and then we'll put the tank back. So here it is, all prepped. Where the tank's going to go, as you can see, there's no rot or rust holes, but it could use a good cleaning. The threads on the bolts are pretty good, and the straps are in good shape. Like I said, they could use a blasting and cleaning, and I just don't have a blaster or anything in front of me right now, so we're just going to put it back together and get this car up and running. Okay, so there we go. New fuel tank is in the car. The bolts are nice and cleaned up by running the bolts up and down a couple of times with anti-seize. Straps, unfortunately, are the old ones. Like I said, would be nice to get time, but I can do that later. This is drain plug bolt. Used a washer in there to seal it. I couldn't find a copper one that I wanted to use, but that one will work. I used a little bit of thread sealant on the threads as well. One thing you want to keep in mind when you're putting these straps in, make sure that your hook is seated in all the way. It's not caught up or something. So you want to make sure that's done before you tighten it down. And also the fuel sending unit. It's up here. See if I can get a good shot of it. There it is. I had to put more of a bend in here. Otherwise it would run into this bracket over here. I don't know if you can see it. It was this line would run right into this bracket because this almost came straight. So it was one of those things that I had to put a little bend in the sending unit to be able to get this line on, and I had to sharpen the bend on this line to the point where it has some little kinks in it. So eventually I'll replace this line, but I just wanted to point that out, that on this particular sending unit that I bought, I had that as an issue. And the only thing I want to note too on these, you either have a 5/16 or 3/8 line. You have a choice. This one happens to be the 5/16 sending unit. So there we go. New fuel tank in the 56. Okay, one of the things I want to check is if I turn the key on, it should read empty. Yep, it's on empty. So that's good, because before the car always read full, and I'm just hoping that that fixes the problem with the fuel gauge as well. So that'd be great. Okay, fuel tank's in. All we gotta do is let the car down and put some fuel in it. Okay, there you have it. Fuel tank's in, car's done, just have to put some fuel in it and go for a drive. But that's it for this episode. I just wanted to show you how to put a fuel tank in the car like this. And also, it's not that hard to do. It's a very good idea. Just get a fresh tank and you don't have any issues. I had a 52 Chevy that had a line. They put in a plastic liner, and that liner just separated. At least for me, I had a bad experience with it. So I was able to get a new fuel tank for that car, and it just solved all the problems. The sending unit goes right to the bottom. Everything works. It sucks all the fuel up. It's not like you're, you know, in that 52, it actually, the line was part of the tank and it rotted off. So anything over like a third of a tank, the car would run. Anything less than that, so it was, you never had like full capacity. And this should make the fuel gauge work as well, which is really good. So it just makes the car drivable, which is, you can enjoy it. Things coming up on this car. We talked about when I bought it was originally to buy it for the body, for the gasser, but it looks like I'm going to try and keep it as a car. So we're looking at paint, things like that in the future. And also, I had this manifold lying around for a while, so we're going to maybe do some dual carbs and on this 261 that's in here. So look for that as an upcoming episode. And yeah. If you like, please subscribe and have a great day.